Welcome, wrestling fans, to the pilot episode of NWCA's Match Stats. This is Glenn Gormley.
And I'm Kevin Hazard.
We want to introduce you, wrestling fans, to Match Stats, using numbers to improve wrestling. That's where I come from.
So we're going to attempt to do a little different approach to our favorite sport?
Correct, Kevin, we sure are.
So this is going to be a statistically oriented look at wrestling. It's not going to be more technique. There are plenty of coaches out there that know a whole lot more about technique than Glenn and I.
Correct. This is a stat show.
So, Gorms, why did you, Glenn Gormley, get involved with a statistical analysis of wrestling?
Well, Kevin, many other sports are light years ahead of us in using statistical analysis. Knowing this, Mike Moyer, the executive director of the NWCA, and Bob DeHaven thought it would be a great idea for wrestling to use more statistical analysis to look at the sport.
So, that being said, why did Mike come to you, Glenn Gormley, about this?
Well, what Mike told me is he didn't know any other ex-college wrestling coaches that had a master's degree in stats, so he called me.
That makes a whole lot of sense. But was it hard for you to make the decision to work with Mike on this?
Oh, not at all, Kevin. As soon as Mike asked me, I jumped in. I'd worked with Mike many times previously and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was really hoping that one day there would be an open door for stats somewhere.
So Mike finally found something that your particular skill set was good for in wrestling.
Yes, it took Moyer and the rest of the wrestling world 35 years to find me on something I know how to do.
So you sat down with Mike's help, and not Mike's help, with Mike's
guidance,
and you wrote a book about stats in wrestling.
Yeah, Mike asked me to write a book on stats in wrestling, and it's a comprehensive, long book about different stats in wrestling.
So you got a book, and that's a fairly large thing. Did you give some thought to breaking it up into episodes to do the show?
Yeah, we sure did. When I gave it to Mike, it was too comprehensive and too long. I mean, it was a long effort. It took me about a year, and my editor, Brooks Zumas, helped me out. So Mike correctly said, let's chop this into smaller increments, and let's make an internet show about it called Match Stats, and that's where we are now.
And now we're going to break it down into even smaller episodes. What was your first thought about breaking it into episodes?
Well, my first thought, Kevin, was bringing you on board. I thought you would be the perfect co-host.
And, sounds like a stats guy. You must not know a whole lot of people if you ended up choosing me.
No, people don't hang out with stats guys.
So, to recap, you wrote a book essentially that used a statistical perspective to view wrestling.
Correct, Kevin. Dead on accurate.
So, when you were writing the book, how did you decide, and what did you decide to concentrate on?
Well, I spent a year researching the book, and I let Mike know it before we started, that when you do a stats project and you peel back the onion, you really don't know what you're going to get, okay? But I really investigated all things that I thought were pertinent to the sport.
Yeah, I read the book, and, well, I really think we should just dive in. I think it's going to be exciting to look at this through a statistical perspective. Perspective is a hard word to say. And I think a lot of us have more hunches about how things go, but maybe the actual data has never been compiled like that.
Correct, Kevin.
Okay, let's dive in. How did you, Glenn Gormley, get involved in stats and sports?
Okay, Kevin. I was getting my MBA from William & Mary when I was the assistant wrestling coach there in the 80s. I was concentrating in finance and stats, and I had to write a grad thesis on my stats angle. Okay, so I approached a professor who luckily is also a Philly boy and a big fan of the Phillies. So I said, what about doing a stats project on baseball? Now, when you go to MBA school, everything's got to be about some big business or something. Well, Major League Baseball is a multi-billion-dollar business. So what I did was, Bill James had just started his days of sabermetrics in the early 80s. This was the late 80s when he was doing this. and I was immediately thrilled by it. So I did my grad thesis on stats in baseball.
So you said sabermetrics and you said Bill James. Can you tell us a little more about them? I'm not really familiar with them.
Okay, sure, Kevin. Bill James is an American baseball writer who's the father of stats in baseball at this point, and he started this group called Sabermetrics. It's basically American baseball research, okay? And baseball is perfect for stats. Well, Bill James became so influential, Time Magazine named him to the 100 most influential people in 2006. It really revolutionized stats in sports.
So that makes a whole lot of sense. And so you're writing this thesis, and how did that go? And I know you were coaching at the same time. Did it interfere with your coaching?
No, it really didn't, because I had to allocate some time anyway to do my graduate work. So it really didn't affect it, but it sure, made me think of the possibility of different sports for stats.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you're writing about baseball, but you're a baseball fan, I know, but you're also a wrestling guy. Did you think while you were writing it, maybe there was an opportunity to use this in wrestling?
Yeah, I really thought what Bill James started would and should be used in all sports, and I really thought wrestling was one of them. I didn't know when it was going to happen, but when Mike Moyer gave me the call here 2 years ago, I was back where I came from and really trying to, help wrestling through stats, something I knew about.
So 30 years later, and so you wrote it, and this is your master's thesis. Did your professor like your thesis?
Oh, my professor loved it. He said nothing like this had ever been published before, and I should go to Hopkins and get a PhD in this.
So, did you follow his advice?
Sadly, I did not, Kevin.
Now, so you spent this time in this thesis. The professor loves it. Why didn't you follow up on it?
Well, number one, I had a business opportunity in Williamsburg outside of stats. And I also wanted to stay local and help the sport in whatever small way I could, even though I was no longer coaching. And, Hopkins is 3.5, 4 hours away from William and Mary, so I decided to stay in Williamsburg.
I just have to think, I know about this time period. So by choosing to go in another direction, you missed out on the explosion of statistical analysis in baseball. You could have been the guy. You could have been the guy that worked with Billy Beane with the Oakland A's and used the statistics, which became the basis for the Moneyball movie.
Yeah, Kevin, that's correct. Moneyball took over before I left off. I don't know what they had done previously, but nothing like that had ever been published. So Moneyball was after that. One thing for sure is, if I continued to pursue this, Brad Pitt would not have played me in the movie.
No. Peter Brand was the character, and he was played by Jonah Hill, as shown on the screen. And looking at that, yeah, you have a lot more in common with Jonah Hill than Brad Pitt.
Yeah, Kevin, you don't need a master's degree in stats to see that correlation.
So we've gotten through the thesis. What's our game plan for this show?
Okay, our game plan is to use stats and numbers to help improve the sport.
So how do you think that this statistical analysis, how does it help the sport of wrestling?
Well, I think, first of all, we gain a lot of knowledge, and also there's so many preconceived opinions throughout the world, not just in wrestling, but in so many ways of life, that you really sometimes need to look at the numbers to see if your notions are correct or not.
Yeah, I've read your book, and I've reread portions of it, and I really thought it was excellent, which shows that I'm a little bit of a geek. But it was really well researched. It was really comprehensive, and there's so many great stats that I think we can dive into in some of the later broadcasts.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the compliments, and I believe there's a lot for many wrestlers, fans, coaches to learn from this book and our internet show.
So how Have you given any thought about how we're going to break it down into, let's say, more digestible portions?
Sure, Kevin. A folk style wrestling match has 3 periods. So we're breaking this down to 3 periods. First period, scoring. Second period, inclusion of women. Third period, growth of the sport.
So how about we do a couple of teasers in a couple of the categories to get this started?
Sure, Kevin. Let's roll with a couple teasers. But remember, these topics will be full episodes down the road in our monthly broadcast.
So first teaser, to whet your appetite, let's start right at the beginning. The topic of our first period is scoring. And my first question, where do the most points come from in wrestling?
Okay, just like the old adage in baseball, is baseball starts with good pitching. In wrestling, it starts on your feet. That's where the scoring comes from.
So on your feet. So how do you break that down?
Okay, Kevin, as you can see from the slide on the screen, in the high school male matches, 53% of the points come from takedowns, and the NCAA men's, 50% come from takedowns.
So men and boys are high school and college, almost exactly the same. Interestingly enough, half the points are takedowns. And I just, that's interesting. And if that's the case, do you also break down how much time is spent on your feet? Let's say pick one of the tournaments.
Sure. In the 2019 NCAA tournament, 61% of the time was spent in the neutral position. You can see that on the slide right now.
That's pretty interesting. I wonder, looking at this, if a lot of coaches know this, and if they don't, using this kind of an analysis, if that would affect the way they run their practices. And I think we could use some feedback on this.
Kevin, that's a great idea. We have our email up there on the screen right now. Any questions, observations, thoughts, be happy to send them to Gormley and Hazard. We'll respond to you. NWCA matchstats@gmail.com is our website, is our email address.
And we'll also, and not we, Gorms will do the research, and probably it'll help us do more analysis.
Correct, it sure will.
So while you're researching the book, how and where was the most places you found your data?
Okay, what I did for collegiate men, I looked at 3 years of the recent NCAA Division I championships, looked at 2 years of the women's WCWA championships, looked at a couple years of PA, both AAA and AA boys, and California, both the boys and the girls.
So that's some really high-level competition you use to base this.
Yeah, we try to use. We wanted to use the highest level of competition, and the Division I tournament clearly is in men, and as is the WCWA in women, and we chose a couple states that were high level for boys and girls, high school.
Yeah, really high level. Did you consider using any other tournaments for this?
Yeah, Moyer asked me about this, but I told him we had a big enough window with what we had to make observations and correct statistical analysis. So we did consider it, but there's a time limit in life.
Yeah. And so that's a really good teaser for our first period. Let's move on to the second period. Inclusion of women in wrestling. Why do we need women in wrestling?
Well, here's why we need women in wrestling. Females are a little bit over 50% of the population in America. What business would come up with a game plan, a business plan, that did not include women? They would be calling their bankruptcy attorney. And Kevin, when you think about this, 50% of America are females, but in colleges right now, 60% of the enrollment is women. We have to include women.
Right, so that's 50% more women in college than men. And that makes perfect sense. And I also am thinking, as you were saying, that changes are always made in business. And if they're made in business, they have to be made in wrestling too to keep up with the times.
Absolutely. Sports are the same way. You have to keep up with changes. Baseball adopted the designated hitter rule in the early 70s. A couple decades later, interleague play, they both caught on and were welcome. Wrestling has to learn to accept women. And when you think about 60% of women, that means for every one male in college, there's 1.5 women. So we need women's wrestling.
Absolutely. So we're talking about women, and when you were doing your research, I noticed you included women in the statistics. How similar were high school women and high school men in scoring?
Okay, we had to compare the high schools on this thing because in college, women do freestyle. As you can see from the slide on the screen right now, high school males average 9.59 points per match, and high school girls, when you control for pins, because there's a high, women are just getting started, is 9.0 points per match. That's about a 5% difference, Kevin. It's essentially the same match, just two different sexes.
That's really interesting. I kind of thought it might be a little different, but not. So that's the scoring. How about the amount of points that women score on their feet? Is that similar to men?
Oh, it sure is. As you remember from the last slide, we have a new slide on screen now. High school males are 53% from takedown points. High school girls are 48%. Once again, same sport, two sexes.
That's again, that to me, that's not intuitive. I think you have to look at the statistics to grab something like that.
Yes, Kevin, you do.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Kevin, it's one sport, one team, one family.
Exactly. So that's another teaser. Now let's move on to our third period, growth of the sport. And so, myself included, I think a lot of fans have been worried over the years our sport was dying on the college level. What did you discover when you did the analysis?
Well, it's a fallacy that the sport's dying currently. Okay. There are currently more four-year college teams, men and women combined, when you combine the NAIA and NCAA in 2020, than there were in 1981-82 when the NCAA merged men and women together as one organization.
So 419 and 81, 420. And I see that, 81, 82, that was men and women?
No, that was just men. Back then, there was only men's wrestling.
Okay.
So now the numbers, yep. But essentially, Kevin, there's more four-year schools to go out and root for right now. And that number was as of October 2020, and it included any teams that were in the process of adding.
So, again, I think that's really amazing. I would have guessed there were a lot less teams wrestling right now. And
yeah, Kevin, many people would have thought that. They don't realize we are now in the Camelot days of wrestling. Okay, this has been ushered in with the NCAA having women's wrestling as an emerging sport, and the advent of women's wrestling has just changed so much in our sport.
And so everything I've heard over the years about Title IX hurting men's NCAA teams, what did you find out about that?
Well, I heard what I've discovered on that, Kevin. I heard the same story you heard, that NCAA crushes. This is not true, and as you can see from the slide on the screen, it only held true for wrestling. Of the top 12 teams, men's teams in NCAA sports, 11 of them increased from 1981-82 to 2020. We were the only one that decreased. And as you can also see from that slide, in the last decade, men's wrestling teams have increased in NCAA because of the advent of women's wrestling. So if Title IX was responsible, you would see a decrease in all the other men's teams. So it was not Title IX that was the decrease of this.
So if it wasn't Title IX, why is wrestling the only sport that decreased?
Because until recently, there were only two sports that did not include women: the 800-pound gorilla football and wrestling. So wrestling had to be put in a headlock and include women.
That makes just total sense. I see exactly what you mean.
Yes. So for decades, we all thought this, but now we look at, hopefully we can look at this differently.
I agree with you 100%.
Okay, Kevin, let's see how good of a job I did today with my stats thing. We're going to see what we learned today. So, Kevin, you were allowed to take notes on this whole thing. I
And I
want to
did.
know
I have my
what
pen in my hand.
good. I want to know what you learned about wrestling right now with scoring. Tell me something with scoring comparing high school males and NCAA males.
I learned that half the points in folk style for male and female, high school and NCAA, come from takedowns.
Very good. What did you learn about the high school women and high school boys, the comparison, the match on the total points scored?
Its scoring is really, really similar between male and female in the high school level.
Good. What did you learn about the growth of the sport?
That we are in the Camelot days of wrestling. There are more four-year schools today than there were since 1982. And something we didn't talk about, but just, we've just come off the Tokyo Olympics, and that just has to, kind of bears it out. I mean, the men and women that we sent to Tokyo came home with just the best I've seen since I can remember.
Yes, Kevin, it was the best at any time since the Second War, with the exception of 1984, when the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc nations boycotted the Olympics. So something we're doing in colleges here in high school, advancing up through has worked. We have 9 medals, so I'm really happy to, say that America is showing its dominance in something, and one more thing. Okay. So anyway, Kevin, I really enjoyed doing this with you. And what we're going to do here, so I know you're well aware of this, but I want to let all the listeners know. The third Wednesday of each month at 3 o'clock. It's easy to remember, guys. Wrestling has 3 periods. Okay, the third Wednesday. Wednesday's the third day of the week, 3 o'clock Eastern time. That's when our weekly show will come out. The next, monthly show. Next month's show is on scoring. And we're going to have different episodes, different months, and we'll rotate through what we do. But what we're trying to do is help educate and show people about stats in wrestling. And with my co-host,
Kevin Hazard,
I'm Glenn Gormley, and we're trying to educate you guys on stats in wrestling because that's where I come from. Have a good night, folks.